Alright guys, in this series of the casts, basically breaking it down to where we are on river left and we have a downstream wind. And for people that are starting out spey casting, I generally like when they set up their spey cast before they cast, their fly should be no closer than their rod tip if they hold their rod out. Because generally speaking, your fly may come up and hook you, which is no good. So when you set up your cast, if the fly lands closer than your rod tip, you should probably just bail out and start your cast all over. So since we're river left, pretending we have a downstream wind, so the wind's coming downstream, we want the fly to land below us, because if it lands above us and we cast, the fly is going to catch the wind, probably come hook you back of the head, shoulder, or just hook your line. So this is just a basic double spey. I like to break the cast down into two parts. We break down the setup and then the actual cast. After you do the setup, when you're ready to cast, you don't want to stop your rod at any time. So I'm going to show everybody here the setup really quick. And the setup is pretty simple. All we're going to do is lift the rod, and basically when the fly breaks the surface tension down below you, when you're watching it, you just drop the rod and hit your outside shoulder. All right, here we go. So fly's done swinging. We've stripped in our running line, or if you don't have a running line, it's fine. I'm just going to lift the rod, basically touch it to my shoulder once the fly releases from the water down below us. So here's the setup. Lift, drop. Fly's still down below us, well beyond our rod tip, so we're not going to hook ourselves. Do it one more time. Low rod, begin your lift, break surface tension, just drop it. That's it. Now the actual cast part of this, after we've lifted, set our rod, fly is just outside our rod tip, I'm going to do the casting part, which is all one motion. And the thing that I like to tell people in the casting part is after they have their setup, after it's here, your rod tip should go no lower when you start to sweep. Basically, once you're here, you can drop your rod, but then as you sweep around to make the cast, your rod tip should never go lower than that initial point after your setup. So lift, I'm gonna do the cast now. Hits my shoulder, sweep around, over the top. All right, so here's the cast. I'm gonna lift, drop the rod, sweep around, over the top. It's basically double spey. Common mistakes in this cast that you'll see is you'll see a lot of body motion where people swivel their body a lot, and that's going to wear you out after steelhead fishing all day or salmon fishing. So I like to keep my body pointed downstream because that's the way you're normally walking when you're fishing. That's the cast. So I'll break down the casting portion now. After your setup, what's going to happen is the rod is basically going to keep a consistent motion all the way around and then fold over the top, and you want your rod tip pointed at the direction you're going to cast. So right here, here's the cast. I bring it around nice and slow, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my hands up to my firing position, which is about reel height, your eyeball level, ear level, and then I cast forward. And when I cast, I'm going to stop the rod kind of at a 30-45 degree angle up high, so I don't push the loop down into the water. So sweep it around, it's going to come up over the top like so. Pretty simple. Common mistakes I notice in this cast, especially when I'm teaching new casters how to cast, is I basically call it a figure eight or a dip. And what happens is people do their setup's perfect, and then they sweep around, and then they dip their rod here, and then they want to cast it like that. And what happens there is your belly hits the water behind you, and that unloads your rod. So it defeats the whole purpose of the cast. So here's an example of what not to do. Bring your rod up, and you dip it down, and then over. That's what I see most people doing. So if you find your line slapping behind you really hard in the water, that means that you're dipping before you do your forward stroke. So once again, once you're at this point, you can drop your rod, but I'm not sweeping yet. Then I can sweep up and then over the top. Set up, sweep up, over the top. All right, another mistake. And this one you can hear because you got to listen to your Spey cast. Another mistake I see is when people sweep too hard before they cast, and what that does is that pulls the fly completely out of the water, and you'll hear kind of a snap when you do that. And that's an example of that. So your sweep around should be an acceleration. You start slow, and then you speed up at the very end, and then come over the top. If you watch your cast instead of focus, if you watch your setup and your initial cast before you're focused on casting out, if you see your fly flying out of the water behind you, and then you cast forward, that means you're pulling your anchor out of the water. So I set up, flies on the surface, sweeping around, still on the surface, and then I sweep it over. So I made sure that whole time that fly was just under the surface of the water before I cast it forward.